So what I want to do is show you an example of the Forbidden Island. You are dropped onto the island at one of the gates. So in this case, you're dropped at the Copper Gate, and you have to find one of these four treasures. So either the Earthstone or the Cave of Shadows. Sorry, not the Cave of Shadows, the Crystal of Fire, the Ocean's Chalice, or the Statue of the Wind. And there are two different tiles that have each of those treasures. And then within the 5 moves, you have to land on Fool's Island in order to fly off of the island with the treasure. The way you do that is with the components or with the vectors that you're given that will determine where you are. So when I look at this, I have a positive 1x. So I start at the Copper Gate and I move in the positive 1x direction. So I'm going to head over this way. And then I'm going to also move in the positive 1y direction, which would be up this way, and end up in the Crimson Forest. So where am I? I can write in here Crimson Forest. Make sure that you type it correctly whenever you type it into Buzz. Now, to find the vector of that, I can look at it and say, well, these two are at right angles, which means I really want to know this resultant here. Since I know the two sides, I can do the Pythagorean theorem. Equals 1 squared plus 2 plus 1 squared and square rooted, and that's going to give me a value of 1.41. So remember, this says to be sure to put these in 3 significant digits. So this is going to be 1.41. Now I also need a direction, so I'm going to do an inverse tangent of that. The opposite is 1, the adjacent is 1, so you wouldn't really even need to do the inverse tangent, because if the two sides are the same, you know that this angle is going to come out to be 45 degrees. Again, make sure this is in 3 significant digits, so my answer here is going to be 5.0 degrees. Now, the next one then gives me a vector that says, hey, I'm going to travel at 2.24, whatever distances, at 297 degrees. Now, 297 is down somewhere in the 4th quadrant, so I know that I'm going to be flying from the Crimson Forest somewhere down in this area. And what I can do then is I can take and break up that vector into its two components. So I can do that the x value will be 2.24 times the cosine of 297. That comes out to be 1. And I can say the y vector is going to be 2.24 times the sine of 297, and that comes out to be negative 2. So the values that will go in here, because these are integers, this will just be 1 and negative 2. So if I come to the right 1, positive 1, and down negative 2, then I'm going to end up in the Misty Marsh. Misty Marsh. Again, make sure that you spell that correctly and that you capitalize the beginning of each of those words. From there, I'm going to go to a negative 2 and a negative 2. So I'm going to come negative 2x, negative 2y, which puts me down into the Cave of Embers. And you'll notice that I landed on one of the treasures. I landed on the Crystal of Fire. So that's going to be my answer that goes in here. The Crystal of Fire. Now, to find the vectors that go with that, I have negative 2, negative 2. I really want this resultant that comes down this way. So I'm looking for this angle and this value. Now, to find the value, I can do, again, the Pythagorean theorem. So I'd have 2 squared plus 2 squared. I don't need the negatives in there because they'll square out anyway. And it wants the Pythagorean theorem wants the magnitude of the sides, not the directions. When I do that, I end up with 2.83. So this will be 2.83. And then to find the direction, I can do the inverse tangent again, and the opposite, which is going to be 2, the adjacent, which is going to be 2, and again, I'm going to get a 45 degrees. Now, remember that 45 degrees is really in the 3rd quadrant, but 45 is in the 1st quadrant. So I still need to add to it 180 in order to put it into the 3rd quadrant. And when I do that, I end up with 225 degrees. So this answer here will be 225 degrees. Now, the next step, notice how we're just flip-flopping back and forth. So the next thing I'm going to do is look at this one and say, oh, I need to break it up into components. So I'll say the x component is 1.41 times the cosine of 135. That comes out to be a negative 1, negative 1. And then I can say that the y value will be 1.41 times the sine of 135. Why sine? Because that's its cosine. And that comes out to be a positive 1, positive 1. So if I go -1 and +1, then I end up at the observatory. And the very last step that I have is I want to find out where I'm going to end up at the very end. So I can take and do the exact same thing here, where I break this guy up into its components. And I'm running out of pen colors. So I'm going to say my x value will be 3.61 times the cosine of 337. When I do that, I get 3. And the y value is going to be 3.61 times the sine of 33.7. Punch that in your calculator and you should get 2. So this will be 3, this will be 2, and hopefully, because we have to fly off of the island, we're going to end up at Fool's Landing. So I'm going to go a positive 2 up and a positive 3 over, and that puts me right at Fool's Landing. Now, a trick on this is notice that the apostrophe is after the S. So whenever you type in Fool's Landing, this needs to be Fool's plural apostrophe landing. And then the last part is to find out, well, what is my final resultant from the very beginning to the very end? So there are two ways that I can do this. First off, I can just literally add up all of these values in the x direction, which is going to give me a 1 plus a 1 minus 2 is 0, and a minus 1 plus a 3 is positive 2. And then I can add up -2, -2, -4, -3, -2, 0, so my y value is 0. And doesn't that make sense? I started at the copper gate and I ended up 2 spaces to the right and no spaces up and down. So I have the 2 and the 0 that goes with that. Then to find my resultant and my direction, the magnitude and direction, I don't have to do anything with this one because it's already 2 and 0, which means that the resultant is going to be 2.00 and the direction is going to be at 0 degrees. If I had like a 2 and a 1, then I would have to do the Pythagorean theorem the same way that I did up here with these components in order to find those values. So then if I take in Buzz, type in the values that I had. So I went ahead and typed all of those in. And the only thing I have to do is to add this down here, the crystal of fire, and hit submit. And then I do want to submit that. And I'm going to get, if I typed everything correctly, and I left things in 3 significant digits for these 2 columns, and in integers for these columns, then you should end up with 100%. So I hope that helps, and it gives you an idea of how to do the Forbidden Challenge board.